American Top 40.
If you dig the proverb that a man is known by the company he keeps, then you're going to find this next artist very heavy. He's been with John Mayall's Blues Breakers, the Yardbirds, Cream, Blind Faith, and featured with Delaney and Bonnie. Now he's doing a solo act. And on his album, he's backed by his friends Bonnie and Delaney. A single from his LP debuts on American Top 40 this week at number 35. Here's Eric Clapton, After Midnight.
After midnight, we're gonna let it all hang down,
After Midnight, Eric Clapton at number 35, and the third of 4 new songs on American Top 40 this week. The countdown continues in 60 seconds.
American Top 40.
And now the current hit, recorded nearly 2 years ago by a group that lasted only 6 months, and whose super guitarist organizer wouldn't let his name be used to promote their records or their concerts. In 1970, a super rock musician who had made his reputation as a member of Cream and Blind Faith organized a new 4-man group that would work as a team and have no individual stars. So they made up a name that had a 1950s sound, made some recordings, and had themselves booked into some concerts. But the well-known founder and lead guitarist wouldn't let his name be used to promote the records and the concerts. And the group lasted for only about 6 months in the latter part of 1970. The biggest single they had hit the charts in 1971, but got no higher than number 51. In the meantime, the identity of the guys in the group became public knowledge. So when the single was re-released recently, most people knew who comprised the group. And in particular, they knew the star who didn't want to be a star. The man who put Derek and the Dominoes together, and who sings lead on this week's number 11 bestseller, Layla. Here's Eric Clapton. Up 4 this week after a couple of weeks at number 15, to number 11, Derek and the Dominoes and Layla. This is Casey Kasem, and our survey of the 40 best-selling LP records in the nation, taken right off the top of Billboard magazine's weekly album sales survey, continues now. And now, a song from the LP at number 24 by the English artist whose greatest ambition originally was to be a designer of fine stained glass, but had to settle for something less: recognition as the world's greatest rock guitarist. He tells a story like this. I had planned to be a stained glass designer, but I got thrown out of school when I was 17 for fooling around with a guitar. I didn't know what to do. So I asked my family to buy me an electric guitar, which they had to get in the installment plan. It became clear I'd have to make a go of it. End of quote. His grandmother, who raised him, remembers it this way. He just sat and practiced all day long, and it rather annoyed me at the time. Now I could sit and cry when he plays the blues. He was always a lonely boy, and his music still gives me that feeling about him. We all loved him so much, there was no need for him to be lonely. At number 24 this week, here's Eric Clapton. From the album History of Eric Clapton by Eric Clapton, Sunshine of Your Love, at number 24 on the National Album Countdown. Well, now I have the latest hit by the English superstar who's been a member of more heavyweight rock groups than anyone else in pop music today. Beginning in the mid-60s, he's belonged to 5 huge groups. First, he was the lead guitarist for the trend-setting British blues rock band, the Yardbirds. After they hit the top 10 in America with For Your Love in 1965, he left the Yardbirds, and the following year put together a new band with 2 of the most respected musicians in rock music, drummer Ginger Baker and bass player Jack Bruce. That legendary rock triumvirate was known as Cream, and their 2 biggest hits, Sunshine of Your Love and White Room, both made it up to the top 10 in 1968. Now the following year, they broke up, and the guitar player formed still another group with 3 more well-known musicians, Rick Gretsch, Ginger Baker, and Stevie Winwood. The name they chose was Blind Faith, and their first and only album together zoomed up to number 1 on the LP chart in 1969. But Blind Faith broke up within a year, and the guitar star moved on to a brief association with Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. Finally, in 1970, he formed one last group, calling himself Derek and the band The Dominoes. They hit the top 10 with their rock classic, Layla. By now, I think you know I'm talking about Eric Clapton, the man whose legendary skill and flashing guitar riffs earned him the nickname Slowhand as a tongue-in-cheek tribute to his talents. From his latest album, titled Slow Hand, here's Eric Clapton with Lay Down Sally.
Don't you think you want someone to talk to?
Eric Clapton's Hot. This song debuted 2 weeks ago at number 28, highest debuting record of the week. Last week, it moved all the way to 18. This week, all the way to number 11. It's Lay Down Sally.
American Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the latest hit by the English superstar who's been a member of more heavyweight rock groups than anyone else in pop music today. Beginning in the mid-60s, this man has belonged to 5 huge groups. First, he was a lead guitarist for the trend-setting British blues band the Yardbirds. They hit the top 10 here in America with For Your Love back in '65. The next year, this guitarist left the Yardbirds and put together a new band with drummer Ginger Baker and bass player Jack Bruce. They called this superstar triumvirate Cream, and in 1968, Cream hit the top 10 with Sunshine of Your Love and White Room. The next year, Cream also broke up, and this itinerant guitar player formed yet another group with musicians Rick Gretsch, Ginger Baker, and Stevie Winwood. They chose the name Blind Faith, and their first and only album together zoomed to number 1 on the LP chart in '69 before they, you guessed it, broke up. After that, this superstar guitarist moved on to a brief association with Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. And finally, in 1970, he formed one last group, calling himself Derek and his band, The Dominoes. And they hit the top 10 with their rock classic Layla. By now, you've probably guessed that this man who can't hold a steady job is Eric Clapton. The man whose legendary skill and flashing guitar riffs earned him the nickname Slow Hand as a tongue-in-cheek tribute to his talent. This week, Eric Clapton is at number 34 with Tulsa Time. Eric Clapton and his band, second week on the chart, moving from 38 to 34 with Tulsa Time. 33 hits to number 1 and counting them down.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
Now on American Top 40, we're up to the current hit by a superstar guitarist who's hit the top 40 as a principal member of more different bands than anyone else in chart history. The first band he hit with charted 16 years ago with a number 6 song called For Your Love. They were the Yardbirds. The next band he hit the top 40 with reached number 5 with Sunshine of Your Love, and number 6 with White Room. That band was Cream. Now, 4 years later, he was back in the top 40 with a top 10 smash called Layla, performed by Derek and the Dominoes. He, of course, was Derek. Finally, the record-setting fourth group that he hit the top 40 with had a top 10 smash 2 years ago, a song called Promises. And the name of that group was, and still is, Eric Clapton and his band. So Eric Clapton is in the AT40 book of records as the artist who's hit the top 40 as a principal member of more groups than anybody else. 4 of them. And isn't it ironic that his greatest success on the chart has been as a solo act? His number 3, Lay Down Sally, and number 1 smash, I Shot the Sheriff, not to mention several other top 40s, all came under his solo billing. His current hit, however, is Eric Clapton and his band. At number 22 this week, here's I Can't Stand It. Eric Clapton and his band fall 10 notches to number 22 in the countdown with I Can't Stand It. You know, over the years, fans of Eric Clapton have often described their idol as the world's greatest blues guitarist or the world's greatest rock guitarist. In fact, some years ago, there was a wave of graffiti in London which read, Eric Clapton is God. Well, writer John Hutchinson asked Eric Clapton how he felt about all that adulation, and Clapton said, quote, "It's a bit unfair to a musician. It can cause a lot of tragedies if you're labeled like that and then come to believe it. Being called the best is a nice accolade, but it's best to forget it quickly." End of quote. Here's Eric Clapton now at number 27 with Forever Man. Climbing 4 notches to number 27, that's Forever Man by guitarist and singer Eric Clapton, formerly of the influential rock band out of the 60s, the Yardbirds. You know, 3 different lead guitarists became rock stars with the Yardbirds, and listen to this. 17 years after their breakup, all 3 former Yardbird guitarists, Jimmy, Jeff, and Eric, are now in the top 40 separately. Details coming up.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
Legends of longevity on the chart and the songs that made them stars. The triathlon of rock and roll. We're up to an Englishman now, a guitar legend who's hit the charts in more bands than anyone else in history. In the 60s, he was with the Yardbirds, Cream, and Blind Faith. In the 70s, with John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band, Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, Derek and the Dominoes, and a group under his own name. His string-slinging skill, his brilliant burning guitar leads earned him the tongue-in-cheek nickname, Slow Hand. At number 26, here's Eric Clapton. This is his 1980s top 10 hit, I Can't Stand It. I Can't Stand It from 1981 by Eric Clapton. The 43-year-old English guitarist is the 26th biggest act in our special countdown. I'm Casey Kasem with AT40's special presentation of the Triathlon of Rock and Roll.
You're with the Shadoe, American Top 40. Now, for anyone who still doubts that drugs can destroy your life, listen to this story. It's about a guy who had everything. He was a brilliant guitarist and played in some of the biggest rock bands of the 60s, the Yardbirds, Cream, and Blind Faith. And if that wasn't enough, then he became a solo superstar, and the hits and the money and the fame and the glory all kept coming. But being a star brings a lot of pressure along with it, and he says he couldn't face the real world. He insulated himself in a world of drugs, pot, pills, and cocaine, and he was completely addicted to heroin. For 3 years, he barely set foot outside his home in London. With his money, he could get whatever he needed, whatever he wanted, brought to him. Food, drinks, and the heroin. So there he sat in his house, shooting up, barely seeing or speaking to anyone, afraid to deal with reality. And his life might have ended if it were not for the fact that he had a lot of friends. Friends like George Harrison of the Beatles and many other famous stars in music. And they helped him realize that if he didn't stop soon, he wouldn't have to face those pressures anymore. He'd just be dead. So with his friends' support, he went looking for help to kick his addiction. He worked with a doctor named Meg Patterson. It's the same doctor who later went on to help Pete Townsend fight his heroin addiction. Recovery is long and slow, but Eric Clapton did it. You know, he's even said he had to learn to play the guitar all over again. That was almost 20 years ago. Today, Eric's drug-free, 47 years old, healthy, more brilliant than ever. And he's at number 37. Eric Clapton was raised by his grandfather and grandmother. In fact, they gave him his first guitar, a plastic Elvis Presley guitar with Elvis's picture on it. Eric's at number 37 with Tears in Heaven, his first top 40 hit in 7 years.
The shadow comes on down. Casey's Countdown.
I'm Casey Kasem. That means we're up to the number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Countdown, and it's by a legendary British musician who, as a child, went from painting portraits and landscapes to painting musical pictures with his guitar. When he was just a child, his parents got divorced, and he was raised by his loving grandparents, John and Rose Clapp. From the age of 6, the boy showed a great artistic gift for drawing beautiful pictures, so his grandparents encouraged him to draw whenever he could. In time, the boy got so good at painting and drawing that he was admitted to the prestigious Kingston College of Art in London. When he enrolled, he was given the choice of studying graphic art or fine art. He chose graphic art. But that turned out to be a big mistake. You see, the young man didn't like working on things like advertisements and packages. What he wanted to do was paint portraits and landscapes. Slowly, he lost interest in art, and by the end of the year, he was doing so badly in his studies that he was dismissed from art school. When the youngster told his grandparents the bad news, they weren't upset or disappointed. They were understanding, and they encouraged him to pursue another outlet for his creativity. The outlet he pursued was music, something that had been a hobby of his since he was a child. He had learned to play guitar over the years, but he didn't have a real good one. That's when his loving grandparents came to his aid. They went to the bank, took out a loan for the equivalent of $250, and with the money, they bought this future musical legend his first professional guitar. These days, he plays guitar for millions of fans around the world on big hits like Layla, Tears in Heaven, and the song that for the second week in a row is the biggest adult contemporary hit in the land. The number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Countdown is Change the World by Eric Clapton.
Casey's Countdown.
I'm Casey Kasem. That means we're up to the number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Countdown. It's by a man who learned to play guitar on some of the worst instruments imaginable. But that didn't stop him. He went on to become one of the most famous guitar players in the world. He got his first guitar when he was 8 as a gift from his grandmother. It was a plastic guitar with a picture of Elvis Presley on it. The boy didn't take lessons. He just listened to records and tried to imitate them. And since it was an inexpensive plastic guitar, it was almost impossible to keep in tune. So the boy had to train his little fingers to play entirely by feel. When he was 14, his grandparents bought the boy a wooden guitar. But it turned out that the neck of the guitar was warped, and the teenager had to develop a technique to play in tune in spite of that. 2 years later, when he was 16, he decided to build himself an electric guitar out of plywood. The teenager got the body the right shape, but he had trouble getting the neck and the frets right. So once again, he had to struggle to make up his own style just to play it. Once again, he didn't let faulty equipment get in the way of his music. By the time he was 18, the teenager had become a master of the guitar, and by his early 20s, he was acknowledged as one of the greatest blues guitarists in Britain, a master of the instrument who was given the nickname Slow Hand. These days, 3 decades later, the man who began playing guitar on some of the worst instruments imaginable has become a legend. The man who for the 3rd week in a row is singing and playing guitar on the biggest hit in the land.
Casey's Countdown.
I'm Casey Kasem. Well, that means we're up to the number 1 adult contemporary song in the USA on Casey's Countdown, and it's by a British rock legend who has inspired a lot of youngsters to pursue a career in music, including superstar Elton John. It was 1963. Elton was 16 at the time, and the British guitar player was only 2 years older. Elton loved music, and it was the rare night that he didn't go out to hear little-known singers like Rod Stewart perform. Elton sometimes went to a club called Old Deer Park in the London suburbs to catch a hot new group called the Rolling Stones. But mostly he went to the Wooden Bridge Hotel in Guildford, England. The band that played there was called Rhode Island Red and the Roosters, and the 18-year-old guitarist in the band was already becoming a legend whose lightning-fast blues technique was earning him the ironic nickname Slow Hand. Elton John says he'd never seen human hands move like this guitarist's. They seemed to have a life of their own. And it was watching that musician play night after night that helped convince Elton John to pursue a career in music. And the 18-year-old guitarist who inspired Elton, well, he's gone on to quite a career himself. A career that's seen him recognized as one of the great rock and blues guitarists of all time. The career that once again finds him with the biggest adult contemporary hit in the land.
Casey's Countdown.
Across the USA and around the world, you can hear Casey's Countdown every week on great radio stations like the best of today's hits and yesterday's favorites, Weeby 108, Westport, Connecticut. The best music mix, KZOR, Hobbs, New Mexico. And that means we're up to the number 1 adult contemporary song in the USA on Casey's Countdown, and it's by a rock legend who's been given 2 very different nicknames in his long career. One is Slow Hand. The other is God. This guitar player and singer from Ripley, England, created a huge underground sensation when he started playing professionally back in the early 60s. One of the bands he played with was John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and it was John Mayall who gave him his first nickname. You see, this guitar player's work was so dazzling, so fast, so incredible that Mayall began to call him, ironically, Slow Hand, because slow was the last thing his hands were. It's a little bit like calling a big guy tiny. The guitar legend's other nickname was given him a few years later by his adoring British fans. By that time, he'd become famous for his work in the groups Cream and Blind Faith. He'd developed a huge personal following, fans who would wait hours in the rain just to catch a glimpse of him. To them, his playing had a mystical, otherworldly quality, as if, like Mozart, his hands were being directed by a higher power. And all around London, graffiti started appearing on building walls and in the subway, graffiti that called this guitar player simply God. No matter what his fans call him, this 51-year-old Englishman has become one of the most important musicians of the rock era, the man who for the 6th week in a row has the biggest hit in the land. The number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Countdown is Change the World by Eric Clapton.
it is, the number one song in the USA on Casey's Countdown for the 6th straight week. Change the World by Eric Clapton. And there you have them, the 20 most popular songs on this week's National AC chart, according to Radio and Records, the industry's number one newspaper. Casey's Countdown comes to you every week from Hollywood. If you have a request and dedication or a question for us, write to Casey's Countdown, P.O. Box 4300, Hollywood, California, 90078. Or you can fax us at 213-272-4300. This program's a presentation of Westwood One Entertainment, produced by Bert Kleinman. Our staff includes Merrill Schindler, Ben Harris, Zach Clay, and Gonzalo Venecia. Production and engineering by Al Ramirez, with Michael Cooper, Sal Cosio, and Santo Cosio. Executive producer Norm Pattis. My name's Casey Kasem. Until next week, when once again we'll count down the biggest hits in the USA, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars. And leave your dial tuned right where it is.